in order for innovation to not just be invention, to not just have new technology out into the world, but for it to be truly innovative, it has to come from a place of a better world.
Welcome to Building Better Worlds. Our mission here is simple: to explore how the innovations of Web3 can deliver on its potential to build a sustainable, more equitable world. So welcome to this episode of Building Better Worlds. We have a special guest, Lucia Gallardo. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did. Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, you're in London. How is it over there?
Hot. I think it's a solid reminder of why the work that we do is so important. Major heat wave, but lovely as ever. Summer in London is something that I think I've always wanted to experience. So I'm very excited to be here.
All right. So you're of Honduran descent, is that right?
Yeah, I'm like fully Honduran. I was born and raised in Honduras, and I lived there until I was 19.
Okay. And then where did you move to next?
I moved to Canada. So I lived in Montreal for about 7 years, and then Toronto for 1 year, which is where I started my company. And then since 2017, I've been living completely nomadically. So I've spent time in about 29 countries.
Oh, nice. That's amazing. So you mentioned you started your company while you were in Canada.
Yeah.
And I've read up a little bit about you, and it shows that you've started a number of companies. So let's
Yes.
start with what is this drive to start companies, and what are you trying to build?
I think a lot of it is really oriented around my love of experimentation. The first thing I ever started was actually with my brother, and it was a nonprofit organization based in Honduras. And I think then my goal was to start a nonprofit company that everyone would think was a startup. So it was financially viable on its own, but it was doing really mission critical and mission centric work in the area of education. And then it was really hard because I think when we first started, people would question why a nonprofit was behaving very similarly to a startup, but really we just wanted to stop relying on donations and to start giving mission-centric work its own financial sovereignty and viability. So that was really important to us then, and continues to be as the organization continues to grow. But then in 2017, I wanted to do the opposite. I wanted to create a for-profit company that sounded almost like a nonprofit, that was like very mission and purpose centric, but that was really creating a place where innovation could thrive, where we could redirect a lot of the advances in exponential technologies and direct them towards solving, real urgent issues. And so I think every time I start a company, the question is, what am I experimenting with? And what is it that we are setting out to play with? And then how does that eventually become its own product or its own company or its own service? But it's really rooted in this desire to play in spaces that are typically either too serious because we're working in humane issues. Climate change is a very pressing issue. Sometimes we work in very difficult humanitarian circumstances. And I think there's a lot of weight around that. And so we try to inject creativity into that space so that we can think more resourcefully and more innovatively. And then when it comes to just technology stacks, making those a little bit more humane as well. And so I think it's a desire to just continue to play with all of these things that we really firmly believe as a company should be inextricably linked together. So that's where it comes from.
That's amazing. And the fact that the thing that spoke out to me is that you're taking this space that's too serious and you're adding creativity to it. And I'm like, that is amazing right there.
Yeah.
So in the companies that you've built, I've heard that you have a philosophy called humane innovation. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell us more about this. What is humane innovation?
I think to me, it's really this idea of understanding the need to think about innovation a lot more holistically, especially when it comes to technologies like, say, blockchain, which are, they have a narrative around decentralization and including everyone. And I think it's really important for us to think about what that means. And so critically speaking, it's important for us to think, sure, that the outcome of implementing these technologies is successful. So we really want to create financial inclusion, or we want to create social, educational inclusion, whatever it is, the kind of impact that we're trying to achieve with this technology, it's important that the outcome also be impactful. But, and I think most importantly, and where a lot of my attention within my companies is centered, is this idea of how do we get there and how much impact is embedded into the process. How are we building very inclusive teams so that we're not coming into a community and either wiping out opportunities that could, really be managed locally and create a lot of and foster a lot of economic activity locally? How are we coming in and complementing with infrastructure or products or services that they need in order to have this ecosystem flourish locally? Or how is it that we're building diverse teams so that a product ends up being a reflection of different lived experiences and not, the only appeal to the lived experience of a, let's say, upper middle class, white man that went to a particular type of university or is, Western European. And there's nothing wrong with having lots of them on a team, but it's also important to have other voices sort of have a big say in how products are built. So I think, how do we add more environmental efficiency into what we're building? And how do we think about the future of our planet in technologies that are in fact using increasing computing power, which is in fact quite damaging to our environment? That's not an issue exclusive to blockchain. It's something AI needs to deal with as well. And so I think when it comes to the concept of humane innovation, it's really to say, technology, it's neutral. It's a blank canvas, and it's a collection of tools and creativity and all of these different things, resources that really allow us to inject humaneness into what we're trying to build. And the more comprehensively we are able to do that, the more impactful and successful ultimately our outcomes will be. And so I think the company really, it sounds very vague or big or whatever, but actually what we do is quite niche, because ultimately what we're doing is just designing and building and implementing projects from a perspective that, in order for innovation to not just be invention, to not just have new technology out into the world, but for it to be truly innovative, it has to come from a place of a better world, right? And so the humane really important, and to think about our long-term social, economic, educational, environmental well-being is critical for us to really leverage these technologies to their full potential.
Nice. And so what are some of the projects you're currently working on?
We've got a few exciting ones at the moment. One of my favorite ones, and I think it's because I have I grew up in Honduras, which houses the largest rainforest in Central America. So it's like the little lung of the Amazon forest. And so I have deep love for rainforests. And, a year ago, one of my closest friends was thinking about NFTs in very similar ways than I was. I'm quite obsessed with this idea that I don't necessarily agree with doing away with capitalist financial instruments or financial products and services. I actually am very curious about their underlying socioeconomic incentives and how we might reimagine those so that it doesn't require an overthrow of the system, but that actually we can change the incentives and the structure of these financial instruments so that they work in our favor and have more regenerative principles rather than consumptive or extractive ones. So with that, we started working on this project to push NFTs to their, to bigger potential. So it's a 10K three-dimensional collection. And it is responsive and metamorphic in that the more that you do to support rainforest protection as a cause, when you donate to our chosen partner, Rainforest Partnership, when you attend community events that center around biodiversity and learning about the rainforest and conservation practices, when you are playing our game or using the NFT to help you meditate with sound on, because it has, rainforest sounds, it's connected in real time to the rainforest. So if it's raining in our biodiversity hotspot, it's raining in your NFT. If it's sunny, it's sunny. If it's morning, evening, you get all of that reflected in your NFT in real time. And so, if you're using this NFT to really contribute and amplify the cause of rainforest protection, your plot of digital rainforest actually starts to blossom and the flowers start to grow and the flowers open up and the trees start to grow. And if you stop contributing, then the plot itself actually regresses and it goes back to its basic state. So the flowers close up, the trees go back to being seedlings. So it is in a way a real-time proof of impact of how you're really contributing to rainforest protection as a cause. So that's one of my favorite projects because we've also really pushed the boundaries in terms of the environmental efficiency within which one can experiment with blockchain. We hear very often that it's an energy consumptive technology, which of course it is, but there's a lot to be said about the sourcing of energy that it consumes. For example, we know that at least Ethereum and Bitcoin have over 50% of their networks currently running on renewable energy, such as stranded solar and aeolic in that order. And we also know that there are new ways in which we can think about computing power. And so this collection was actually rendered in special, with a special partner called Tresorio based in France, where we actually trap the heat emitted by the computing power so that it never releases into the environment, and immediately recycle it and turn it into a heating source for water. And then we donate the hot water to social housing units across France. So this project, 10,000 NFTs, are actually contributing 4 million liters of hot water to social housing units in different parts of France. That's about 41,000 5-minute hot showers on average.
Oh my goodness,
yeah.
that is amazing. And I like the first one, the rainforest. So if I got it right, just as a simple man's concept, with this NFT, as long as I'm contributing, I'm growing my own digital garden or digital rainforest.
You
Whereas
are.
I'm also supporting the rainforest that is in Honduras.
Exactly. Well, actually, the organization that we're working with is supporting biodiversity hotspots in Peru, Ecuador, and now Mexico. So there's an area of rainforest known as a biodiversity hotspot, which means that there's a lot of life that's in those areas that is not found in surrounding areas of the rainforest. And these are critical ecosystems for rainforest protection and our overall fight against climate action, because they have temperature regulating properties. And so those are the areas that we're focused on protecting through this project. But I personally developed my love for rainforest in Honduras because that's where I grew up. But the project is the same. So this collection just uses this special type of computing power that was enabled by our partner Tresorio in order to be an example of environmentally efficient innovation in the NFT space, which we're constantly sort of seeing criticized for the damaging impact that they might have on the environment. So this is sort of a way to say, hey, actually, if we hadn't developed this collection, this water would have been heated with electricity. And now instead it's using computing power, and we're like never letting that heat go out into the atmosphere. And so it has a net positive impact on the environment. So this is the type of work that Emerge is doing at a global scale. And we're really excited with the type of projects that we're getting. We've worked on some land titling for farmers across Uganda with our partner Penta. We've done some work in digital identity with the United Nations Development Program. So it's been a lot of complex, interesting, forward-thinking work that we're just very, very proud of.
Nice. I am from Uganda, so when you mentioned that, I was like, oh,
in
nice.
Kasese, that's where the pilot was.
There you go.
Yeah.
Small world. So now, you as a digital nomad, right? How do you run these teams? You're passionate about it, I can see that, but how do you manage to run all these teams and put them on the same page and get these projects out there?
The team is really special, for starters. Like they're so passionate themselves, and they're so purpose driven that I make a joke very often that I'm a collector of good hearts. And so as soon as I find them, I never want to let them go. So a lot of them are on the team, but they're just very self-motivated. So when I was young, I didn't really, to be honest, get the chance to travel very much. So when I was able to, and finally, got to see Europe for the first time in 2016, I was very intent on traveling, like just being able to have that freedom to travel. It was really important to me. So the company was intentionally designed from conception to allow for remote work. So really, the pandemic didn't force us to go remote in the way that other companies did. For us, it was always part of our DNA, because we also wanted to build teams that, promoted freedom, teams that promoted self-sovereignty and exploration. And if we were going to be a company that was going to be working on impact projects, and we needed the freedom and flexibility to really go and work on the ground for weeks, months at a time if needed. So the company was designed like this. And so managing it has been, highs and lows. We've gotten some things right, some things wrong. We at first used a bunch of different tools and then have narrowed that down to really relying on a few critical ones. And I have an amazing right hand in my chief operations officer, who's very diligent about experimenting with new systems and following up, even chasing me when necessary. And I think a big thing that we've done successfully is team culture. I think one of the things that we've implemented since the pandemic is that essentially we knew that everybody was kind of working on their own and remotely. And we didn't want them to feel like they were working alone. There's a big difference in, working remotely and feeling alone in the workplace. And so what we did was we started this call once a week. It's called the Emerge Coffee Shop. And what we do is everybody on the team joins the call, and there's no work talk allowed. So we do, current events. We talk about personal things very often. Today, we actually had a discussion on navigating mental health in the workplace and dealing with a lot of awareness building and dealing with issues around depression and things like that. So there was a lot of vulnerability displayed on the team today, from the team today. And so we have conversations around, one of our employees is about to become a father for the first time. We've had conversations on books, on, even celebrity events sometimes. Like, we never know what's going to come of these calls because there's no agenda, and it's really just everyone can have a place to get to know each other, understand our interests. And what it's done is, number one, it's given us a sense of community as a team. And number two, it actually makes small talk deeper and more meaningful, because the next time we're all on a work call and, everyone starts off the call asking with how the weather is, our small talk is actually much more meaningful than that. We follow up on a few things from coffee shop, or, we check in on each other more consistently if we know someone is struggling through something or needs support with something. So I think that's been probably our most successful initiative, and it's everyone's favorite call, obviously. But it's just led to really positive dynamics within the team, even when the calls are strictly work related.
Oh, nice. So now, I know you just came back from Paris. You
Yes.
were a keynote speaker, right, at the Blockchain Summit.
Yeah.
All right. So what was some of the topics you discussed, and what was your outtake from the whole summit?
So the summit was centered around sustainable blockchain, which I think is really important, and obviously, and also I think it's something that's really catching on. There's this, subculture within the DeFi space known as the regen space for regenerative economics, and it's growing quite rapidly. So a lot of the conversation really was guided around how we really clean up the space in relation to trust in projects that are green, so that we make sure that it's not just greenwashing or impact washing, but that the projects meaningfully have trust and accountability and traceability into what impact is actually being achieved through these projects. That was a big part of the discussion, especially as it relates to carbon markets. So I think that was a very critical component of the discussion. I personally gave 2 talks. One of them was on the ways in which we believe that impact NFTs are really much more resilient to bear markets and crypto winters than other types of NFT projects and traditional tokens. So it was really a celebration of what makes NFTs and impact NFTs specifically a lot more resilient and different than the traditional ways we've been thinking of NFTs in this market. And then the second talk I gave was actually a panel discussion, and it was really whether capitalistic tools and incentives can coexist with Web3 principles, because very often we pit them against each other. And this really was a conversation on what are the ways in which we can actually leverage or reimagine these incentives or these instruments in ways that are more conducive to regenerative outcomes. And so those were the 2 topics of discussion. They were quite fascinating. They will be available online. And to be honest, what I learned is a lot related to just the excitement and the purpose that's fueling of this space, the science that's fueling the space. And you're starting to see a lot of worlds come together between data aggregators and collectors, IoT developers. We're looking at a lot of blockchain and crypto economists. We're looking at a lot of people that came from an international development background, and all of these people are coming together with a deep, sense of purpose around cleaning up our space, and hopefully having that, trickle outside of Web3 into the world itself. And so it was a very exciting conference. I had given myself a moratorium. I was like, I'm going to spend 2 months not going to a single conference because I feel like I overdid it this year. And then I made an exception for this one conference because I love Paris and because I love sustainable blockchain conversations. And I'm so happy I went. It ended up being one of my favorite conferences of the year. So really exciting. And it just allowed me to do a little bit of travel, which I always love to do. I'm heavily nomadic. Like, I live out of 2 suitcases, and that's it.
There you go. There you go. You live in the life. Now, so you actually almost answered my next question. So we have these capitalistic incentives, right? And the new way of thinking. And we're trying to figure out, most people are like combative with each other, these 2 thought processes. How about blending them together? What do you see as the future of that? Can it be done? And do we think it's a viable product after that?
Absolutely. I think that it can be done. Obviously, we have to be very intentional and daring when it comes to doing things like that. But, as one of the key features of our NFT project, The Eternals, is this idea of secondary markets. And so for the longest time in the NFT space, we've been hearing the market sets the price. Sure. Yes. The market sets the price. When, Bored Ape hits a floor, then you see everything sort of skyrocket. And we've seen that happen to great success in many cases and also to great failure in many cases. But one thing that we really wanted to experiment was this idea of injecting a little more financial sovereignty into a typical NFT instrument. And so one of the things that we did is by making the NFT itself evolve and be responsive to engagement data, then essentially you can choose at what point you really sell it on the secondary market. So that's a personal choice, because if you sell it as soon as you buy it, it's, still a seedling and like unblossomed plot, then that will carry a value that sure the market will set. But now you actually have a choice in saying, actually, I'm going to engage for, 3 months and see what happens to my NFT and then sell it in 3 months once it's more visually complex and comes with more community benefits. And that has a different, value in the market. And so this idea that we can have a little bit more decision-making and autonomy into the value that we're going to receive back for investing in impact means that impact is not just the outcome of having chosen this particular NFT, but impact is the conduit by which it becomes an investable asset class, because the value itself is intricately tied to your personal impact footprint. So that was like an experiment that we ran, but there's also other things that I think could be exciting. For example, right now we know that there are certain plants in the rainforest that are critical to pharmaceutical ingredients. So about 98% of medications currently have at least one ingredient that comes from a rainforest. If you think about that, they're worth more by growing them and regrowing them than they are when we graze for, land or for oil or for whatever it is, logging, whatever it is that we're trying to destroy it for. So why haven't we made, financial instruments that are reflective of, bidding for the future of a particular plant based on what we expect that return into the pharmaceutical industry to be? So for example, we bet that X plant will have a life yield of, X amount for a pharmaceutical industry, and then have you place a bet on that, like similar to a futures product, I suppose, and then making sure that actually the incentive, the economic incentive, is for that plant to stay healthy and to grow and to have that full yield that we know that it can have, and then continue to regenerate it because it allows you to have a flourishing economic incentive to do so. So I think when we really start to break down what is it about this economic instrument or this, this tool that we've got in front of us, where are the socioeconomic incentives that make people want to buy it, that give you back a return, and that encourages other people to participate and organize themselves in the direction of regenerative finance, I think that becomes a very interesting opportunity that's perfectly doable. And you have a lot of projects like Regen Network that are really trying to figure it out as well. And so we're not by any means alone in this community. I've spent, the past few weeks with many people that are solely focused on solving problems like these. And I just think it's a very exciting space. And I think that after the pandemic, where I think everyone realized that if consumers are not okay, if employees are not okay, then everything fails. And it's really critical for us to understand that as innovators, we have to do better with our products and services in the future, and that consumers are demanding it, and they're not going to accept as much greenwashing and impact washing as they have in the past. They want to see impact. They want to know that it's there. They want the traceability to trust it. And I think that that's really a game changer for how serious people take these kinds of mission-centric or purpose-driven, tools and instruments and innovation in the future.
And the thing I like about it the most is that you're taking NFTs, which is new technology, to the masses, right? And you're giving it a practical application, like with this plant in the rainforest, which means I could do the same thing with an agriculture farm in Uganda or something like that. It gives the person on the ground ability to do what they know how to do. They might not know how to do technology, but they know how to raise chicken, for example. But it gives somebody over here the ability to use the same tool, this new technology, to support that cause over there. I like that.
This brings back this concept of humane innovation. I think a lot of times as technologists, we can get bogged down in this idea that everyone has to know how everything works. And the reality is that you don't. You really need to know what you can do with something and what that intended outcome is. And so if you think about like a smartphone, the smartphone that's in your pocket right now, like, do you know how it works? Not really, like, no, but you use it every day constantly. And so the reality is we have to make products that really work for people. And I think that the only way that we can do that is not to think about, you know, human adoption as the end all be all only vision that we have, but really understand how we get there and what that process is, and think about humaneness more holistically, because as soon as we start doing that, we start to see real opportunities in reinventing how things have been done, and in also understanding critical issues and how to really get to people in a way that doesn't require educating them on your UX UI to the same degree that just solving a problem and meeting people where they're at could do with the same amount of resources.
An education or a re-education of the way of thinking. Like we're not going straight line. Let's bring all these pieces together and kind of create a solution. Right.
Yeah. So hilariously, that's where like a lot of our clients have come from. I think, you know, once people sort of started understanding a little bit more about our company's DNA, they started approaching us and they would say, hey, can you come in for, you know, a few hours or a day or whatever and teach us how to think, you know, holistically, impactfully. And then after that, we would come up with like these really cool ideas for like new product lines or new services or whatever. And then they'd bring us on board to build those out. But initially, a lot of our early private sector clients, they just, you know, we've even had like funds and family offices sort of have us come in and just teach them how to think about, you know, the convergence of sustainable development and impact and regenerative practices and things like that, along with innovation and exponential technologies, with the underlying goal of really reimagining what those underlying socioeconomic incentives are. So this convergence is really niche. It's what we specialize in, but a lot of our work has started from this idea that like we want to think more critically about impact and innovation and how those two things come together, and learning how to do that makes for better innovators, we believe.
I have two daughters. One is just turned 6, right? And I'm inspired the way your passion, your energy, the way you're talking about the problems and solving them in very creative ways. So how can I know you're working with it's called Crypto Kids Camp, something like that? Is that right?
Yeah, I've supported them significantly in the past and continue to amplify their work, advocate for them. And I also work with a couple other organizations that really boost inclusion in the space. Crypto Chicks is also another one. And then some early work in Central America with my nonprofit foundation, which is all education centric. So we're really trying to bring in people that traditionally would maybe be left behind a little in this sector, and trying to teach children how to at least think about the skeleton required for certain types of skill sets. You know, there's a lot in this space that's new programming languages are coming out for you to be able to use specific type of protocols or things like that. But it's really not about learning that specific language. It's about learning a lot of the logic around that, because once you understand certain types of logic or skill sets, a lot of that is transferable into this technology, new labor force, new market dynamics that we're seeing at a global scale. I think really the way to build more inclusive teams is to not have a list of like pre-required specific experiences that you need in order to qualify for a job, but to really understand as an employer or a potential employer, to really understand like, hey, we need an effective communicator. And even though you don't have experience as a crypto marketer, you have very good communication skills, you have very good experience in a transferable, you know, industry that could come in and play a role. It's the same thing with someone that's been coding for a really long time. You know, the fact that they don't code in this particular language doesn't mean they couldn't pick it up really fast if we give them, you know, the support that they need in order to make those skills transferable. So I think when we think all the way back to children, we really have to understand like, what are these critical elements that we need, you know, kids need today in order to have a set of like very foundational transferable skills that can take them in multiple directions in the future of work. And I think that that's a particularly exciting thing for me to support from the perspective of, you know, what I do both within projects. We try as best we can when we're building teams and things like that, so to exemplify this philosophy, but also in my spare time to really dedicate some time to that, because I think it's so important to see more faces like mine and like yours in this space, just really advocating for more people to come into it and to bring in all of the lived experience that they have and make better products that build a better world.
One last question. You know, you're on this rocket ship, you're the lead of this ship. What's next? Where are you guys heading? What's the future looking like for you?
No, I want to do exactly what we're doing, but bigger scale as usual, like growing this out. I think we've got some interesting new lines. We have been receiving a lot of interest from family offices, from impact investors and funds that really, institutional investors that want to understand, they love ESG, impact investing, et cetera. But how do you do the right kind of diligence and what the potential unintended consequences of impact might be? How do we really assess where these dynamics between profit and social return and so on come to play? There's a lot of frameworks that like have targets and measurements, but how do you really build like a holistic sense of what works and what doesn't, and bring that in with a strong technology and technical understanding as well? So we've been getting a lot of those requests. So I think a big piece of what we're doing next is we're going to be putting out more content. And I'm going to take the blame for this one entirely. I was always very hesitant to spend any money on marketing. And by any money, I mean like $1 was too much for me. So we've actually grown very, very organically over time. And I know that the time has come for us to, rebrand, for us to put out all of our content, to start really publishing our case studies about what's worked, what's not worked, and so on. So I think a big piece of our future is, Emerge is a highly ambitious company, but we also know we can't solve every single problem. But what we can do is take all of these lessons and all of this experience and all of this passion and sort of create content that allows other people to also pick it up and run with the problem that they're passionate about solving. And actually with the Eternal, something that we're trying right now that I think has worked quite successfully is, that team gets together publicly for our team meeting. So our team meeting can be heard by any person on our Discord and soon on our Twitter Spaces. And we let them understand, like, what problems are we solving through this project? What bumps have we run into? Oh no, we made a mistake on this. Like, everything can be heard through these calls. It's radical transparency of building in public. But one of the key things that it's doing is it's allowing other people that are interested in impact NFTs to come in and say, oh, this is what it takes to put out a project. Here are some, shortcuts or savings that I can make based on the experience of the Eternals. And so by holding these meetings in public, we're really able to just put ourselves out there as people that are transparently trying to build the next. And so hopefully people will run with it and build the next. And so we'd be really happy with that. So I think that's really where we're going, is like continue doing the work that we're doing at bigger scale, but at the same time, put in a lot of effort and passion into actually putting out content that helps the space grow, develop, and that really saves people a lot of headaches, that we've had to go through. And hopefully it inspires people to think a lot more about humane innovation and to think a lot more about how we achieve a lot of these very ambitious targets within the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals together.
Holistic innovation. That's amazing. Anyway, but thank you for your time, and wish you all the success and the drive.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.